A little less than a week ago, there was a really intense rainstorm that happened up here at our 6-acre site in Trumansburg, New York. I didn't realize how intense until I came up to visit 2 days later, and there was this, which is a rain gauge reading well over 5 inches, a little closer to 6. That happened overnight, which could be catastrophic. Be interesting to look through this landscape and see how it responded to such a massive inundation of rain in a short period of time. I think what I'd like to do is start by walking out to the high point of the property, which is the southwest corner, and that is where Juan and I dug the larger 50-foot diameter hand-dug pond last summer and see how that reacted. And I think it's also an opportunity to point out some observations that can be kind of subtle after an intense rain, but that can give a signal as to what may have happened. For example, what I'm seeing right here tells a story. It's subtle, but there's some movement that happened. So this wasn't like this a week ago. This happened after the rain, and it clearly tells me that there was some pretty intense water flowing down through this main pathway, and I can see that because of this movement of pine needles and soil through here. So a little bit of erosion. You can kind of see how the water was flowing, sending those needles through. Something to keep an eye on and certainly be aware of, but it looks promising that whatever crazy amount of water is flowing through here, even though we use this as a pathway to drive on once in a while, it didn't erode, but it's something to be careful about in the future. I can see here, this is where a truck tire sometimes will ride, right next to the Fuki, and so it's a little bit of a depression, and it's also a little bit worn out or weakened soil, and I can see that pine needles moved quite a bit as they went down through here. So yeah, soil disturbance on a slope, even though it's a very gentle slope, is definitely a place where a really intense rains can be pretty damaging. We'll take a look at the rest of the watershed out there, which is to the west, but at the fork in the road here, we'll split towards the southwest and take a look. Now, one thing that feels really exciting, way back when my folks first bought this property in 2008, if there was 6 inches of rain overnight, this whole area would be relatively flooded. And the reason for that is because it was degraded farmland, pretty compact soil, and poorly drained overall. And I think by having the pond systems and really thoughtful overflow systems put into position, that's helped immensely in having water, when it's in an excess state, find somewhere that's meaningful and thoughtful to go. And one of those meaningful spots would be the pond that we dug last year. This took on about maybe 2 feet of water with that rain. It's a little cloudy, but overall it did a really nice job, and I think it filled up just to the point of being ready to overflow. Still need to work on figuring out, is it bleeding out through this corner, and ultimately I'd like it to go around and over to another pond system. But pretty stunning to see many thousands of gallons of water perched nicely in this pond at the upper part of the landscape. Part of what contributed to the pond, I think, this metal roof area from this Cobb experimental building. This is where we collect rainwater, and this actually serves a lot of the nursery needs of this whole site. There's a couple 100 feet of old hose sending this water to lots of containers. And this has an overflow, very low-tech system, but the overflow comes out and over. It would be interesting to know, I'm sure I could crunch the numbers. Maybe I'll do it. The 1,000 some odd square feet of roof metal with 5.5 or let's say 6 inches of rain, how much excess? Because that's what got sent over to here to the pond. Something really nice to see with this pond so full. Part of the soil coming out is what built these raised beds nearby, and so when we get obscene amounts of rain out of nowhere or spring melt, this soil does not actually flood at all. It's loose, decompacted, lovely soil that has access to all that water, but it is well drained for at least 6 to 8 inches. And all the plants that are in here, the sweet cicely And the sea kale and the Miyoga ginger right next to this pond seem to be incredibly happy after that rain. And since this is the high point in the landscape, once this pond is full, we can think through some thoughtful overflows that kind of create a cascading effect of holding more water in different ponds downslope. I do ultimately want to get the water into this area and develop it into another large pond, but for now, the overflow comes into this space, which is now nice and full. It's descending a little now that it's been a few days, but that definitely filled up and overflowed. And this was the excavation to get the subsoil to make the cob for these structures. So it's kind of neat. You got a pond in exchange for building materials, and this is stabilized enough now that there's poplars starting to grow in the edges. It's a little vernal pool for the frogs. And the overflow from that little pond, part of it splits and goes around the landscape that way. Some of it goes through this pretty gentle ditch, and because this is so thoroughly vegetated now, it took a couple of years to get established. You can barely sense the lull in the ditch, but it basically flows through a lot of vegetation, through some shrubs, and then starts entering into one of the main drainage channels. And what I like to see here, this tells me a positive picture, is that with all of that flow, this water is quite clear and still. And I think that's part of the benefit of having a vegetated courseway. Ideally in perennials, I didn't really actually plant most of the things that you see in the walkway or this poplar in the water, but they all add up to being really good at filtering and slowing the water and stabilizing it, even in a pretty chaotic moment. This little body of water is what Juan and I dug a few weeks ago, so very, very young system, and it's actually a lot darker in color and a little bit cloudier. You can see that there. So this is because, there's excess nutrient from having turned the soil and opened it up, and vegetation hasn't had a chance to really lock in. And the idea for this is that it would be a pond in an insane moment, and it can wick water into these beds, but by and large it would drain down to a common channel over there and be a walkway through most of the summer. But this is what it looks like when it's not vegetated and a super early disturbance. But back from this main channel, heading down slope very gently, and again through vegetation, it enters into this area where we've got a whole bunch of logs that can absorb water and be a fungal source. It's kind of like an aquatic floating hugel mound. Right now the water I'm walking through is about 8 inches deep, and you can see the vegetation starting to go over those. They'll get integrated, and this will just be a really rich organic matter filter at some point. And it just keeps on flowing, slow and steady. One real interesting challenge is that having waterways like this that during most of the season are dry but are available to absorb water and kind of hold it for a bit because of all the organic matter, we just don't have enough frog population to respond to that in a timely manner. And last night I was out working, and this is 1 week after this intense rain, so the water's been standing for a week, and the mosquito life just exploded out here. So we, in a hurry, need to figure out getting a bunch more bat boxes established in the landscape and think through more stable pockets of water nearby that frogs can be in. So long as there's frogs really active in a spot, it seems like they take care of the mosquito larvae pretty well. It's kind of insane to think how much water actually landed in this landscape. This tank is many 100-gallon tank. I think it's about 3 feet across, 10 feet long, and 2 feet deep, a little bit deeper. And all of the water that's in here just came down from the sky. So it's 6 inches of standing water in the bottom of this, probably at least 100 gallons right in that square footage. And that happened over the entirety of this landscape, along with the watershed upslope of us too. Pretty immense, many millions of gallons of water being absorbed and shunted and hopefully taken the energy out of so they don't move soil with them. And I think overall that's what happened in this landscape. This western wall here is the boundary between our space that we steward and our orcharding neighbors to the west. You can see vegetatively it's getting really thick. I'd like to go even thicker, add some more layers into that. And the waterway that I dug to mitigate the toxins coming from their space is this channel here. And I noticed when I came here the other day that some soil had sloughed in here or there enough that where the water first comes in from their orchard, which is somewhere right around there, it had overflowed a bit. This walkway was wet and this channel was wet here. And so I had to go through and dig this out again to make sure the water goes to the north and ultimately aims back into their property. And a fair bit of management to do that kind of work. But it feels really worth it. And now the water is still. We can drop some more charcoal into it, get some vegetation in there down slope and have it filter more. But really this is one area on the landscape where I want any incoming water to truly just move along. And you can see these are the two spots where I saw water coming in from their orchard. I could see it trickling down. So as we're digging the channel out to get the water to send all the way down and ultimately back into their landscape on the other side of that ridge down there, all of the soil that came out shovelful by shovelful can get dropped right where the water's coming in. So next time we get a crazy rain, I'll look for another blowout somewhere down the line, but we'll basically make a speed bump by digging down and building up a swale that goes down this entire length and vegetate the heck out of it on their side, mainly with nitrogen fixers. It seems like redbud, black locust, river locust seem to thrive in this. So why not? They can fertilize and build organic matter in the soil that can filter whatever's coming through there. A little ways back, I made a diversion ditch that uses a cinder block to switch on or off, so to speak. I talked about this before. This is a ditch that goes over with charcoal in it through a whole bunch of switchbacks and over to an irrigation pond, which we'll take a look at. And luckily the rate of flow is so intense that it kind of moved the brick enough. I moved it the rest of the way, but basically this channel, again from the orchard heading north, if I want the water in our landscape, I can put this to this position, pack some mud behind it, and that channel then gets directed through this charcoal ditch to an irrigation pond. But the water is coming so hard and fast and without enough filtration that moving that out of the way lets it continue on northward and play the magic trick of going back over there. But it'd be interesting to see what happened with the rest of this watershed. When that ditch is on, quote unquote, it goes through this little stand of pines. Now you can't really see it because it's so vegetated, but that is lovely in my mind. Goes to this first ditch, which has been backfilled with a bunch of charcoal and sticks. So lots of fungal interactions. Through a ditch here, you can see the blackness underneath vegetation and charcoal. So every fleck of water has to interact with really nutrient and chemical hungry charcoal and plants that want to break stuff down. And through a couple settling pools with speed bumps over them. And I would suspect water did move through this when it was raining like crazy, but I don't see too many issues. And overall, the water's pretty clear by the time it gets to here. Each of these speed bumps clarifies the water further and further. Finally, through a little vegetated slit here, which now has standing water in it, and over to this irrigation pond. A little murky, definitely received some intense flow at certain moments, but we've added duckweed to float on the top as a nutrient absorber, and we added water celery or minari all along the edges. They actually got drowned. This went up about 3 feet. It was quite low. And so hopefully we get this fully vegetated, fully filtering. But for now, instead of having this water filled anymore, I cut the ditch back to let it go to a common drainage. Anyway, it's a little complex to describe, but it's neat to have these switches. It's basically mud and stone switches that say, okay, water, go this way, go that way. And if I dig a little down, it'll go that way. If I build it back up, it'll go this way. This time of year, there's just so much filled in vegetation. It's pretty hard to actually read the nuances of how water's flowing, but to see the wetness in this channel and the wetness in this channel where they converge and go over this one little hump Again, I could fill that little channel with soil up 6 inches, and moving that level packed tight up 6 inches would increase the standing water level in about 1.5 acres of this property by 6 inches. It's a control valve. And having those little subtle mud packs and stone packs dotted throughout, and keeping them open during an extreme rain, and then closing them back up when you get into drought to hold onto more water, it just does incredible work. I could keep walking down slope and looking at other overflow states and microponds, but it's the same basic picture over and over again. To me, the takeaway is 6 inches of rain overnight could be disastrous if we had a tilled, seriously ditched property, but having lots of little waterways, lots of ponds, lots of filtration, lots of areas that are vegetated, the water can move in subtle ways, relax out and release both nutrient and silt load over and over and over again, and millions of gallons of water moving through this landscape in one evening can be partitioned and stored and relaxed as they go. And that feels really important and great to know we can do it with hand tools. It's amazing, it's just 1 week after that rain. Believe it or not, this wheelbarrow was completely bone dry right before it rained. This was all what came out of the sky. And to visualize that landing on all of this landscape, it's a stunning thing that the soil can take so much water back into itself. It's a miracle.